Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. What's good? You know the vibes. Jon Jeune here at the real Jon Jeune _FF, and welcome back to another live episode of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. Today is October 14th. It's 7 a.m. here. It's a Tuesday, and we are breaking down everything you need to know heading into Week 7. Now, it was a rough week across the league with quite a few injuries here, some breakout performances that, might have helped swing some games here, might have even swung your season. So this morning, we're diving deep into the top waiver wire ads and which players are actually worth the hype and worth going after. So before we get into any of that, if you haven't already, make sure you check out the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Patreon, patreon.com/FFDX. That's where you'll find the brand new, relatively brand new, it's like 4 weeks old now, Fantasy Football Diagnostics, Fantasy Football Cheat Sheet. If you join, again, that's completely free, but if you join as a member of the FFDX supporter tier, then you get the full waiver wire article, expanded rankings, and of course, our Sunday morning Q&A. It's called Sunday morning Q&A, but we do jump on there at 12 p.m. So, make sure if you want all of that, it's just $1 a month. I think it's the best value you will find in the industry. So you can join at patreon.com/FFDX. All right. If you are watching live, you're in the chat. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Drop your questions as we go. And let's jump right into the Week 7 waiver wire here. So, like I said at the top, we did have some injuries, right? Like Kyler Murray at the start of the game, it was looking iffy for him coming into Sunday, but he did not play in that game on Sunday against the Colts. Jacoby Brissett ended up taking over for him. Marvin Harrison of the Cardinals left the game with a concussion. Obviously, Lamar Jackson, we know he's been dealing with that hamstring injury, did not play in Week 6. The Ravens have a bye in Week 7, and John Harbaugh has already said he expects Lamar Jackson to play. Tight end David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns, he left Sunday's game with a knee injury, did not return. Mike Gesicki of the Cincinnati Bengals, he left with a pectoral injury, did not return. Green Bay wide receiver Dontavian Wicks injured his ankle, did not return. Indianapolis backup quarterback Anthony Richardson suffered an eye injury pregame. Seems like he had some, freak accident with a resistance band that ended up causing an injury to his eye and fractured his orbital. So he landed on IR. Rams running back Blake Corum, he suffered an ankle injury in their game on Sunday, didn't return. And then one of the biggest, injury of the day, probably LA Rams wide receiver Puka Nacua, he suffered an ankle injury. Tried to return the game, but did not return and is expected to miss some time here. New York Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson, he suffered a knee injury that is likely to keep him out the next 2 weeks. The Jets have a bye in 3 weeks, so if he stays out the next 2 games, then then that'll give him 3 weeks to get healthy. LA Chargers running back Omarion Hampton, he's on IR already with an ankle injury, but I think many thought that he'd be out for just 4 weeks, but it was reported that he is expected to be out longer than the 4-week minimum. Tampa Bay wide receiver Emeka Egbuka, he was ruled out of Sunday's game with a hamstring injury, could end up missing some time, although the Bucs are saying they're not expecting him to miss as much time as teammate Mike Evans. Tampa Bay running back Bucky Irving, he's continuing to deal with the foot and shoulder injuries. He's expected to miss Week 7. And one could draw the conclusion that with the bye week coming up in Week 9, that they potentially keep him out in Week 8 as well, so he can come back fully healthy in Week 10. And then Tennessee wide receiver Calvin Ridley, he suffered a hamstring injury and did not return. And then late last night, I just don't even have the details on this one, but DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears, he was seemed like he was dealing with something in that game, and then it looks like he was hospitalized after the game. Ended up having to stay in the DC area. Not again, I'm not sure exactly what he was dealing with, but that's definitely something to monitor as we move forward. So, all right, let's jump into the players and let's get to it, guys. So, start with the quarterback position. Again, if you're new to this, these are going to be in no particular order, right? I'm just just based on how I have them in the show notes, right? If you want to know who my top ads are, then you'll go to you probably need to go to the cheat sheet on Patreon. And the only reason I say that is because Tuesday evenings is usually when I'm working on my projections. The cheat sheet usually comes out 8 p.m. Eastern time. So if you by that point, I will have understood all the matchups, what the landscape looks like, what the an idea of what the rankings start to look like, and then these guys I will rank the waiver wire ads accordingly in the cheat sheet. Right now, I could tell you who I'm leaning towards, right? As a top ad, right? Like last week, I was able to know that, like, hey, Matthew Stafford is probably my top guy, although that one failed to come to fruition, given quite a few variables there. But you know, if you want to know exactly who I'm targeting, you want to know exactly how much fab I'm recommending, all of that is in the cheat sheet, right? So, check it out. It doesn't cost you anything. It's 100% free. All you got to do is go to my Patreon and subscribe as a free member, and you will get that cheat sheet every single Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. Right. So, starting with the quarterback position, let's talk Jackson Dart of the New York Giants, available in 68% of Yahoo leagues. Now, look, you might not start him this week in a tough matchup against Denver. However, his legs make him an intriguing rest of season option going forward for teams that are looking for that safe floor at the quarterback position. He's had 3 straight games with 50-plus yards rushing. And, Jackson Dart actually looked pretty good. I mean, in that Thursday game against the Philadelphia Eagles, most of his passes seem to hit the receiver right in the hands, or they seem to be in an area that only his guy could catch it. So, we obviously know what he can do with his legs, and in this Giants offense is lacking pass catchers, but he looks extremely competent back there as a passer. And who knows, maybe my bar is low as a Jets fan here. But anyway, Jackson Dart, with all jokes aside, does look pretty good here. So I think you can continue to trust him. Nobody expected him to have the game that he had on Sunday, or on Thursday rather, against the Philadelphia Eagles, and he came out, and I think going into Monday night he was the QB3 on the week. So I think he's definitely worth a look for those in need of help at the quarterback position, or just want another option on their bench rest of season that you can stream off your bench. Next up, Seattle quarterback Sam Darnold. Speaking of Jets quarterbacks, available 62% of Yahoo leagues. Now, Houston is a tough matchup for any position, let alone opposing quarterback. So I don't know how much faith you could have in Darnold this week, but you could also go with worse options at the position. Darnold obviously plays in a good environment where he's throwing the ball to what looks like might be the offensive player of the year in Jackson Smith and Jigba. So, they got a good connection going right now. It's cooking right now. So I think you can continue to lean on Darnold a little bit, especially if you're looking for some options with, some heavy hitters like, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, not going to be available this week due to being on bye. I failed to mention that. Baltimore, Buffalo on bye this week. So don't play those players because you won't get any points. All right, let's move on to old Joe Flacco, Cincinnati quarterback. Joe Flacco, available 92% of Yahoo leagues. Look, desperate times call for desperate measures, but he's facing a Pittsburgh defense that he's already faced once this year, but this time with better weapons. It's actually funny. He'll have played them 3 times this year by the time this year is done, which is really funny. But He's playing with better weapons this time and a worse defense than he did last time when he was playing with the Browns. So that's a pretty decent spot for him, given that Pittsburgh has allowed an average of 18.7 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. Moving on to New Orleans quarterback Spencer Rattler, available 93% of Yahoo leagues. Now, Rattler has been solid from a football perspective, while also having some solid fantasy days, thanks in part to a decent amount of passing volume, as well as his willingness to run the football a little bit as well. He's got a Chicago defense on deck that has allowed, going into Monday Night Football, has allowed the 10th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. So obviously we'll have to see what that looks like after Monday Night Football. Jaden Daniels did have himself a pretty solid day. But Spencer Rattler, I think, is a lower end option as we look at these quarterback streamers. And then Carolina quarterback Bryce Young, available in 78% of Yahoo leagues. Young is coming off his second best game of the season, having thrown 3 touchdown passes against Dallas, and now gets another plus matchup against the New York Jets defense that, while they did look better against Denver and London this past week, they still have allowed 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3. So, Bryce Young, he is never going to be this like ceiling option, kind of like how I talked about the other day. But, if you look at his production, right, nothing really changed. Like the yards per attempt didn't change. The only thing that changed was he threw touchdowns, right? So, if he can do that this week against a Jets defense that, honestly, like this Jets team looks like, the defense played well, but I think just mentally, if you get these guys in the tank, that it could be a bad day for them. So, and a bad day for them means a good day for Bryce Young. So, all right, let's move on to the running back position. And again, these are in no particular order, so just run with it, guys. Kenneth Gainwell, Pittsburgh running back Kenneth Gainwell, available in 58% of Yahoo leagues. And we talked about Gainwell last week. We've talked about Gainwell pretty much every week this season. Anyway, he seemed to get a bit more playing time like we kind of expected after a big week 4, saw 6 targets in the passing game. So he should have some flex appeal as we move forward, with the built-in upside of being the insurance policy behind Jaylen Warren. Now, look, Gainwell didn't look all that great or effective on his touches, but he did that. He looked like that prior to his big game in week 4. But we also know he's got the trust of the coaching staff. He's got the trust of, Mike Tomlin. He's got the trust of Aaron Rodgers. So, that's about as important as getting the football, because all of that trust leads to him getting the football. So, if anything happens to Jaylen Warren again, Kenneth Gainwell slots in as the RB1 in Pittsburgh. Moving on to the next guy on this list, let's talk LA Chargers running back Kamani Vidal, available in 69% of Yahoo leagues. And while clearly I read this LA Chargers backfield incorrectly, Vidal ran circles around Hassan Haskins. He had 18 carries for 124 rushing yards to go along with 3 catches on 4 targets and 14 yards on the score. This matchup next week is a bit tougher with Indy against Indianapolis, but as we often say, volume is king. And right now he seems to be the lead guy in the backfield. So moving on to the next guy on this list, Sunday morning, we had some interesting news, right? Adam Schefter comes out. Obviously, we're talking about Arizona running back Bam Knight, available in 88% of Yahoo leagues. So Adam Schefter dropped a news bomb on Sunday morning, saying that Bam Knight would start the game for the Cardinals and lead them in carries or lead them in touches. I forgot what the wording was, but it basically insinuated that Bam Knight would be the lead back. However, if I read this correctly, Michael Carter started the game, but however, the snaps were mostly even between the two, because I say that Michael Carter started the game because I was, that game was on Red Zone, and I picked up Bam Knight in places where I had Michael Carter, and I either dropped Michael Carter or I hedged a little bit and, dropped somebody else and started Bam Knight. And I just remember Michael Carter at one point had like 3 carries for 13 yards, and Bam Knight hadn't touched the ball yet. And then Bam Knight converted on a goal line carry, and after that point, Bam Knight did actually end up out carrying Carter. But like I said, the snaps were mostly even. Knight did see more carries than Carter, but Carter had more targets, which then made it like a near even split. Like I said, Knight did convert a goal line carry, but this seems to, at least for now, be a two-man committee. And this is funny, right? Because when I talked about Michael Carter last week, I brought up Bam Knight, and I talked about how Bam Knight looked actually pretty good. And I thought that, it was going to turn very quickly in that game where they were just going to start giving the ball to Bam Knight, uh, you know, and phase out Michael Carter. And that didn't happen. But it seems like the Cardinals saw what I saw, and they thought they had to get Bam Knight more touches. They had to get Bam Knight more involved. And this is the second time that Michael Carter has to try to deal with Bam Knight, because that happened like 3 years ago with the Jets, after the Brees Hall injury. So, anyway, Michael Carter of the Arizona Cardinals available in 45% of Yahoo leagues. Now, while some may have panicked, me included, it seems that Carter still has a role in the offense. He should continue to be added in 12-team leagues and should be a potential flex option as we move forward here. So, again, the role that he has, as a pass catcher as well. And I didn't mention at the top, but Arizona running back Amari DeMarcado, he suffered an ankle injury in the game. Not quite sure the severity of it, but that role should then obviously, go to Michael Carter here. Moving on to the next running back on this list, Houston running back Woody Marks, available in 43% of Yahoo leagues. Now, folks may have dropped Marks after his down week and the fact that Houston was on bye last week, but Marks should be rostered in 12-team leagues, especially as the Texans play in some higher scoring games that would highlight his ability as a pass catcher. There was a report that came out over the weekend that the Houston Texans view Woody Marks as more of a pass catcher, and they don't view him as a true, 3-down back, and something about limiting, his injury concerns and things like that, and his history at college. He was really used as primarily as a pass catcher. So it seems that they might have put him in this box, right? They've got Nick Chubb as the early down thumper, but I don't think that after the big game he had in, what was that, week 4, that you can just put him in this box here and limit him from getting these touches, right? He looked like their best offensive player in week 4, and then obviously Nick Chubb led the backfield in week 5. So, it could be this topsy-turvy thing that we have to deal with for the early part of the year, but the cream usually rises to the top. And so Woody Marks, I think, will continue to see some big usage down the stretch here. All right, moving on to Atlanta running back Tyler Algier. I feel like the poster boy for Algier at this point, but available in 66% of Yahoo leagues. Again, Bijan's backup, should be rostered in 12-team leagues. He's got some standalone value too. He's had three games with double-digit PPR points over his on the season. So obviously, a lot of those came with him scoring touchdowns, but as we saw yesterday when the Falcons upset the Bills, right? If the game is going their way, they're like, Algier is going to be in the game. He's going to be involved. That defense actually looks pretty solid. I said that earlier in the year. So, they're going to find themselves in some positive game script, and Tyler Algier will be involved in those situations. So, Algier makes a ton of sense as an ad, whether you have Bijan or you don't. But if you have Bijan, like, you should 100% have Tyler Algier on your roster, like 100%. It's not even a question. Moving on to the next running back on this list. Let's talk Isaiah Davis of the New York Jets, available in 96% of Yahoo leagues. Now, look, the New York Jets look like they're playing a different sport than everyone else. So you might wonder why do you want their backup running back, right? Well, there are these Brees Hall trade rumors swirling around, and it's funny because I wrote this, typed in my show notes yesterday, and I wrote this, and then maybe 15 minutes after I wrote it, Brees Hall, I guess it was reported or somebody took a screenshot of his Instagram that he, put an Instagram post and was like hashtag free 20. Which is funny because that came 2 days after he said he wants to be a New York Jet and he wants to be here. Whatever. Anyway, running backs that tweet like wide receivers. What do I know? But anyway, if these trade rumors are real, I before that tweet or before that post by Brees Hall, I would have said I don't believe it happens. I have been adamant that I don't think it was going to happen. It just didn't make sense, right? I mean, I know the rumors were there, and the rumors have been swirling around for a couple of years now. But at least right now, at this point, if Braylon Allen was still healthy, this trading Brees Hall makes some sense because at least you have somebody to play the position. But if you don't have Brees Hall, you obviously don't have Garrett Wilson. It's really it wouldn't make sense to get rid of your second best offensive player behind Garrett Wilson. But obviously with Garrett Wilson injured, your best offensive player. So again, I've been wrong before, and if I'm wrong, Davis would slot in as the top running back on the team essentially overnight here. So that's why I think Isaiah Davis is worth the pickup. At first, I thought he would have a role, but that doesn't really seem to be likely. They're leaning heavily on Brees, which makes a ton of sense. But if Brees is traded, then Isaiah Davis, significant, his value significantly, it's like a penny stock that, just overnight goes up 50, 60%, right? So, this is low stakes right here with Isaiah Davis. Sorry guys. It was a rough football weekend for me, just as a Jet fan. Some fantasy stuff didn't go well either, so it was a rough weekend. And this is just reminding me of the terrible franchise that is the New York Jets, just sitting here having this conversation. Anyway, I digress. Moving on to the next matchup, the Chicago Bears running back Kyle Monangai, available in 93% of Yahoo leagues. Not a viable play, but continues to be an insurance policy behind DeAndre Swift here. I feel like this is the same blurb that I've read for the last 5 weeks. Oh, wait, because it is the same blurb I've read for the last 5 weeks. Monangai has, I could be wrong here, but he has not done anything of note to this point. 5 carries for 19 yards and caught 1 target for 25 yards. So, purely just a insurance policy running back, no standalone value here. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver position, and let's talk about San Francisco wide receiver Kendrick Bourne, available 65% of Yahoo leagues, back-to-back games with 142 receiving yards. Bourne is heating up right now if we're playing NBA Jam rules. The back-to-back games with exactly 142 receiving yards is actually low-key funny. Anyway, Jennings has already come out, Jon Jennings, that is, has already come out and said he's dealing with a low and high ankle sprains as well as broken ribs. So Bourne could continue to have a role, especially if Pearsall has to sit in week 7 here against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, the 49ers are expected to get George Kittle back, but I think that affects, obviously that's going to affect Bourne here a little bit, but I think it affects Jake Tonjes more than anything. So yes, I think Kendrick Bourne, we can continue to roll him out there. I think he's a solid play. Moving on to New England wide receiver Kayshon Boutte. He's available in 65% of Yahoo leagues. Is that true? See, sometimes I gotta fact check myself, right? And I don't know, because I see the numbers on, and sometimes I don't even believe them. But Boutte is available in 91% of Yahoo leagues. I'm like, if 35% of y'all are counting on Kayshon Boutte, I think we might have a problem. But anyway, available 91% of Yahoo leagues. Boutte has had his biggest game of the year, catching all 5 of his targets for 93 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. He led all Patriots wide receivers in snaps and routes run, according to NFL Next Gen Stats. So with a matchup on deck against Tennessee, I think this is a solid play. I mean, the Tennessee defense doesn't give up a whole ton of production to wide receivers, but Tennessee just fired their head coach. Obviously that could go one of two ways. I think Brian Callahan was absolutely terrible. So maybe it goes positively. But then there's also the fact that you got the revenge game narrative. Mike Vrabel, who was fired from Tennessee, going back to Tennessee to go coach against his former team. So, Vrabel was brought up by Belichick, so he's a little petty. He could be a little petty for sure. So, I think the New England probably steamrolls the Tennessee Titans this week. Anyway, let's move on to Las Vegas wide receiver Trey Tucker, available in 52% of Yahoo leagues, continues to be solid double-digit PPR outings in 4 of his last 6 games, or 4 of 6 games this year. And with Bowers out for what looks like the foreseeable future, Tucker may continue to see these opportunities here. Again, not the way I thought this Raiders offense would go, but Tucker continues to be solid with double-digit PPR points in 4 of 6 games, like I said. So moving on to the next wide receiver on this list, let's talk New York Giants wide receiver Wan'Dale Robinson, available in 41% of Yahoo leagues. Now, coming off a game in which he scored 20-plus PPR points, he's now had back-to-back games with 7 targets. The matchup against Denver is a tough one, but being the only option in the passing attack should continue to play to his favor. Moving on to the next wide receiver on this list, now hold your nose, maybe grab that Pepto-Bismol or the Tums or whatever you may need, but we'll talk Denver wide receiver Troy Franklin, available in 73% of Yahoo leagues. Yeah, definitely not the game that I expected from Franklin this week, but if you look at that whole passing attack in Denver, the passing attack as a whole, they did not deliver. Not one player. I mean, the only player that I think was worthy of that you played and you were like, oh wow, that's actually pretty good, was Evan Ingram, who we talked about last week. But this whole passing attack did not deliver, as the Jets actually played defense for once. So I still like the upcoming schedule with the New York Giants, the Dallas Cowboys, the Las Vegas Raiders in 3 of his next 4 games here. So again, still like Franklin, not jumping ship here, not going to, raise drop. I think there's a pretty solid spot for him coming up. Next, let's talk Indianapolis wide receiver Josh Downs, available in 51% of Yahoo leagues. Again, brought him up last week as well. Didn't realize the fantasy industry was so down on him, but he's coming off his best game of the year and finally scored his first touchdown of the year. Now the yardage totals are still low. I think only had 42 receiving yards in this game, but he should continue to see these opportunities in the passing game as a secondary option, or tertiary option, I should say, behind Tyler Warren and Michael Pittman Jr. Going back to Denver, let's talk Denver wide receiver Marvin Mims, available in 63% of Yahoo leagues. Again, very much similar to Troy Franklin, where the whole Denver passing offense was absolutely non-existent in week 6. And so, I'm willing to throw that out here. I still love the upcoming schedule with the Giants, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Las Vegas Raiders in 3 of the next 4 games. All right, let's talk Tampa Bay wide receivers. We talked about Emeka Egbuka missing time, potentially with this hamstring injury. We obviously know that Mike Evans has been dealing with with a hamstring injury of his own. Chris Godwin, which I failed to mention at the top, he is dealing with a fibula injury, which is kind of close to the broken ankle that he had last year. I'm not saying that the injury is close. I'm just saying proximity on the body is close, right? If it is the same, if it is the same leg, so you wonder, is it something connected? Was there some kind of setback? Is he dealing with something with that had to do with that broken ankle from last year? So he missed week 6, was already ruled out for week 7. So if you have a situation here potentially where Chris Godwin, Emeka Egbuka, and Mike Evans could all miss this week 7 game against Detroit, And so then, therefore, Sterling Shepard would slot in as the most trusted wide receiver for Baker Mayfield. Maybe not the best at this point in his career, maybe not the most explosive, but the most trusted wide receiver for Baker Mayfield against a Detroit defense struggling to defend the wide receiver position in a game that is tied for the highest total on the week at 53 and a half. And failed to mention, Detroit will also be. I don't think it might. I think they will definitely be without one of their better players in their defense and in their secondary in Brian Branch, who is going to be suspended for one game, being this game most likely, for basically starting a fight, inciting a fight at the end of the game against the Kansas City Chiefs. So if that happens, you take a secondary that was already bad, or the pass defense that was already bad, and you take away one of their best players, then you can create some problems there. So Sterling Shepard, I think, solid play. Again, it's not going to be, there's not going to be a ton of upside with this play. But I could see like 7 catches for 50 yards and possibly a score here. So PPR, PPR leagues, I really do think he's a solid option this week given the matchup. But let's stay in Tampa Bay. Let's talk Tampa Bay wide receiver Tez Johnson, available in 99% of Yahoo leagues. Now, this is going to get a little confusing, right? Because there's 2 Johnsons on Tampa Bay. Both of them scored. Both of them had double-digit PPR points this past Sunday. So Tez Johnson, the rookie out of Oregon, he's now had back-to-back games with double-digit PPR points. Of the 2 Johnsons, Cameron, no relation, seems like Tez seems like the better bet as he's run more routes, played more snaps the last couple of weeks, and this past game as well. Available 99% of Yahoo leagues. Again, solid option. And I think even if Mike Evans, right, because I think Mike Evans is probably the most likely of the top 3 receivers to play, right? Godwin's already been ruled out. Ibuka dealing with the hamstring injury, as we often see. If the player suffers an in-game hamstring injury, and it's bad enough for him to not be able to return to the game, there's a pretty strong chance that they'll miss at least the next game. So Mike Evans is probably the most likely to play. And if that happens, I think Tez and Sterling Shepard still are viable plays. Obviously, you just bump them down a little bit. Now, this next one is contingent on all top 3 missing time, right? And that's Cameron Johnson, Tampa Bay wide receiver Cameron Johnson, available in 100% of Yahoo leagues. Now, Cameron had more targets, more catches, and more yards than Tez, while also scoring a touchdown. However, like I said before, he seems like the third option behind Sterling Shepard and Tez Johnson, as he ran less routes and played less snaps than those other 2 guys. But a game with a 53.5 point total, if these top 3 receivers, and if Mike Evans, we'll talk about Mike Evans specifically, if Mike Evans misses time, then there's a possibility that Cameron Johnson is not as involved. And maybe he's still involved because maybe they'll have Mike Evans on some sort of pitch count because they don't want him to re-injure, especially as Mike Evans has had, he's had his fair share of, he has a history of hamstring injuries. So, all right, let's talk. I wasn't prepared to talk about this guy, because I, again, just woke up and found, or when I woke up, I read this morning about the DJ Moore injury. Again, don't know exactly what it is, what the severity is, but for him to spend the night in the hospital, it must mean something, pretty serious there. So Chicago wide receiver Luther Burden III is available in 89% of Yahoo leagues. Now he had 4 catches on 4 targets for 51 receiving yards, I should say. Obviously had the big game in week 3, right? 3 catches for 101 receiving yards and a touchdown. And then, we talked about not why we weren't going to add him going into week 4. And that pretty much, we pretty much hit that one on the head. But he, came out of a bye week, which you know that I love, right? Rookies out of the bye. But with DJ Moore possibly, missing some time here, then Luther Burden comes in here as an intriguing option, right? He's got New Orleans this week. If DJ Moore misses any extended time, he's got Baltimore, Cincinnati, the Giants, in the following 3 weeks. So, and also it's one of those things where Luther Burden, if he is utilized, or if he shows out in his opportunities, it's one of those things where you might not be able to put him back in the box, right? So, uh, I think he's at this point of the season is the time to be adding some of these forgotten rookies, right? These high draft picks, first, second round picks that are not, maybe weren't seeing a ton of work, but as we see their utilization change, as we see them get a little bit more involved in the offense, right? These are the guys that are going to make impacts, right? They're going to have the high scoring games because they are, they're rookies, right? They're talented, but they're also, their coaches don't necessarily trust them at the start of the year. So as we get further and further through the season, and we get closer to the end of the season, these guys get a little bit more involved. These guys are more comfortable in the NFL. They're more comfortable with the offenses, what the coaches are asking them to do. And then you start to see some of these big games here, right? So Luther Burden, I think, definitely worth a speculative add. Again, available in 89% of Yahoo leagues. Now, let's continue with the wide receiver position. There's still a couple guys that I want to talk about. Let's talk. We talked about Christian Watson already last week, but we'll talk about him again. Available in 91% of Yahoo leagues, returning from a knee injury that he suffered last year. Again, the wide receiver room is a little crowded. We obviously know that Dontavian Wicks is, he left Sunday's game with an ankle injury, so we don't know the severity there. But Christian Watson could have a role, especially Jaden Reed missing time, and if Dontavian Wicks has to miss some time, then Watson could slot in here and have a solid role. And then the last wide receiver that we're going to talk about today, LA Rams wide receiver Jordan Whittington, available in 100% of Yahoo leagues. Now, with the injury to Puka Nacua, obviously Devontae Adams, being more involved is the easiest conclusion to draw. But Whittington saw his usage increased, and we kind of saw that last year at times when Puka Nacua was out, as well as when Cooper Kupp was out. Because last year I think it was pretty easy for, Puka Nacua. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Last year was pretty easy for Puka Nacua to, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, they were both able to play the same role, right? Where they're basically like this big receiver that they use in the run game. They use him in the screen game. Obviously, they use him as a conventional wide receiver, but that role is a little bit different than a traditional wide receiver. So that's what Devontae Adams' role is in that offense. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, they were both able to play that role last year. And so when Puka was injured, Cooper Kupp was able to go back into that position. However, when Cooper Kupp was injured, they relied on Jordan Whittington to play that role and play that position. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. The production, that doesn't mean he's going to get the production that we see from Puka. Obviously, I think a lot of that is going to go to Devontae Adams, but Whittington will be on the field and he will be involved in the offense doing some of those Puka things, which means that he will get some usage if Puka has to miss some time. All right. So I don't want you to hear, guys, hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying Jordan Whittington's the next Puka Nacua. I'm not saying that he's even going to get 80 to 70% of what Puka Nacua does. I feel like a lot of that is going to go to a lot of that's going to go to Devontae Adams, but Jordan Whittington will have some role in this offense, in one of the better offenses in football. All right, that is all I have for wide receivers. Let's move on to the tight end position, and let's talk about New York Jets tight end Mason Taylor. Obviously, definitely not the game we would want to see from Taylor in the matchup against Denver. Had one target, one catch. I don't know, was it even how long was that catch? 2 yards, I think. Anyway, but this week he's got a nice matchup against a Carolina defense that, pending the results of Monday Night Football, allowed the fourth most PPR points to the position. So also you add in the fact that that there's the injury to Garrett Wilson, and sorry, the thought of this Jets offense without Garrett Wilson is I think I'm laughing. I can't tell if I'm laughing because it's funny or I'm laughing because it's painful. But anyway, that could even mean more targets here for Mason Taylor. So again, I like his stretch of matchups here. He's got Carolina, he's got Cincinnati. I think there's another matchup on deck that I like quite a bit here. So I think you'll continue to see some big games here from Mason Taylor. Yeah, Carolina, Cincinnati, then they got bye. Then he's got Cleveland, New England, Baltimore. It's actually a nice stretch of matchups here for Mason Taylor down the stretch. All right, moving on to the next tight end on this list. Let's talk Tampa Bay tight end Cade Otton, available in 88% of Yahoo leagues. Now, speaking of tight ends who could benefit from injuries to their wide receiver teammates, let's obviously talk about Cade Otton. Back-to-back games with double-digit PPR points. Otton makes a ton of sense as a streaming option at the position. Again, when you consider the injuries that they have, I think that's why he's been a little bit more involved these last couple of weeks with Evans and Godwin. Godwin was back last week, but with the injury to Evans, and I think Cade Otton's definitely, he seems like Mr. Necessary for them, right? Like they don't like really. They prefer to go to their other options. So Cade Otton, cardio Cade, as he has often been dubbed for the amount of cardio he gets. Runs a ton of routes, but doesn't get targeted. He, I think, will stand out here, especially in this matchup against Detroit. With some of his wide receiver teammates potentially being out of this game. All right, let's talk Cleveland tight end Harold Fannin Jr. What a love-hate relationship I have with Harold Fannin Jr. Available in 73% of Yahoo leagues. I don't hate Harold Fannin Jr. I actually love the player quite a bit. I was just frustrated the last few weeks with his role. And of course, as soon as I say I'm over him, right? Still brought him up last week. I think we still talked about him on the matchup show. I have to check that. But of course, as soon as I say I'm over it, he has his best PPR day of this season with 15 PPR points after catching 7 of 10 targets for 81 receiving yards. The yards and the targets were a career high, while the 7 catches match his career high from week 1. And now with Njoku injured, and we don't know how the severity, we don't know how much time he'll miss, but this could even mean more usage for Fannin, who has a night like a beautiful string of matchups coming up with Miami, New England, the Jets, Baltimore. Like those are his next 4 matchups. And there's a bye week somewhere in between there, but those are his next 4 matchups, and you gotta love those 4 matchups there. I mean, if I just look at the drafted cheat sheet here and see where those teams rank against tight ends, New England, 5th most fantasy points against tight ends the last 3 weeks. Miami, 19th most fantasy points against the last 3 weeks, but that's still allowing 14.2 PPR points per game to the tight end position. You've got the New York Jets, the most PPR points to the tight end position in the last 3 weeks. Baltimore, the 17th most PPR points to the position in the last 3 weeks. Again, 14.5 points PPR points per game to the position. Some great matchups here for Harold Fannin, who Dylan Gabriel seems to love throwing in the ball. And obviously with Njoku out, like all of these tight end, these tight end opportunities are going to flow to Harold Fannin Jr. All right, let's move on here. We got New York Giants tight end Theo Johnson available in 78% of Yahoo leagues. Johnson didn't do much last week. Has a tough matchup on Denver, on deck. But with not many options in the New York Giants passing attack, he should continue to see work here. Let's move on to Denver tight end Evan Ingram, available in 52% of Yahoo leagues. Now, another solid outing for Ingram in week 6, and he's now had 3 straight games with at least 6 targets, and now he's got a revenge game on deck against the New York Giants defense, who, obviously just allowed the big PPR day to Dallas Goedert, who was it 11 catches Goedert had, or I can't remember if it was 11 catches or 11 targets. By the way, Evan Ingram, he's been heating up as of late, and with the revenge game, I love chasing a revenge game narrative. Evan Ingram, I think, is a solid streaming option this week, and possibly even as we move forward here with those, because he's got that same schedule as Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims, who, obviously we talked about before. Let's talk LA Chargers tight end Oronde Gadsden the second, available 99% of Yahoo leagues, played his highest snap total of the season, playing 77% of the team snaps, while also running a season high in routes. Caught all 7 of his targets for 68 receiving yards. And we talked about Gadsden on the matchup show. That was obviously before. We knew Quentin Johnston might be limited. We didn't know he'd be out. And we weren't even considering that when we talked about Gadsden. But this was the encouraging part about this game that he played, Gadsden, right? And the involvement in the offense was that Will Dissly was active for like the first time in 3 weeks. He played ahead of Will Dissly. Tyler Conklin was a healthy scratch, right? So they clearly made it a pointed effort to get Gadsden not just active for this game, not just in the game plan, but he was playing meaningful snaps, like a full allotment of snaps as a tight end 1 in this offense, right? So it seems that Gadsden, again, might have a legit role as we move forward here. And I think he's definitely an intriguing option when you consider his athleticism of a former wide receiver. He's going to continue, I think, to be a streaming option as we move forward. As you want a tight end that's attached to Justin Herbert, right? So, and last but not least, the break in case of emergency option at the tight end position. We'll talk New Orleans tight end Taysom Hill, available in 92% of Yahoo leagues. Now, Hill played more snaps in week 6 than he played in week 5, but he only saw 1 touch in this game in week 6. But that 1 touch was a 1-yard goal line carry that he converted for the Saints' only touchdown of the day. So again, with his upside, the fact that if there's an injury in the backfield, right? Well, let's not even talk about the injury, right? They clearly are going to involve him around the goal line, right? Goal line, short yardage situation, right? There's always going to be the trick play that, or not, it's a trick play, but he's going to throw the ball once or twice a game. Then there is the built-in upside that he has, right? If God forbid there's an injury to Alvin Kamara or Kendre Miller, Taysom Hill sees more carries, right? If there's an injury to Juwan Johnson at tight end, Taysom Hill might see a role there. If there is injury or ineffectiveness at the quarterback position, you will see Taysom Hill there, right? So Taysom Hill has this built-in upside. Like, honestly, I seriously, right? I'm not exaggerating when I say this. If you have the roster spots, I would hold Taysom Hill on my team. And, if I don't have one of the top tight ends, I would literally either stream a tight end who has a great matchup, or I would play Taysom Hill. Right? Like what other tight end are you going to play that could, like, almost, I don't want to say guarantee you a touchdown, but that's what you're playing. You're playing a tight end. So like you're either playing a guy who's involved in the offense, who's going to see targets, or you're playing a guy who can score a touchdown. And this is about like as guaranteed a touchdown as you can get with a 1-yard, touchdown here with Taysom Hill. So I know this might sound wild. Like, John, like, why are you going crazy over Taysom Hill? It's not that serious. I'm just saying it's a cheat code here, right? And if you're looking for a tight end option, instead of like sitting here and trying to play the game, or maybe you're in a deep league and there's no tight ends available, people who are holding 2 or 3 tight ends, right? It happened. Taysom Hill is an option. I got a buddy who's playing in a 14-team league, and he's like, he's thinking about trading away Dallas Goedert so he can get Bucky Irving. And I'm like, that's a solid trade. And then he's like, oh, but who should I play at tight end? Because he's getting Mark Andrews back in the trade. And I'm like, honestly, I would just pick up Taysom Hill, start Taysom Hill, right? Because I looked through his league, like none of these guys that we just talked about are available. So yeah, Oronde Gadsden was available. So there's nothing wrong with picking up both Oronde Gadsden and possibly a Taysom Hill, and then Gadsden has a good matchup, you start him. If you don't feel comfortable, play Taysom Hill, right? If there's an injury in the Saints, play Taysom Hill. Anyway, that's my rant about Taysom Hill. Let's move on to the defense and special teams of the week. So let's talk Kansas City defense. They're available in 46% of Yahoo leagues, 11.5-point favorites at home against the Las Vegas Raiders. We've got the New England defense available in 49% of Yahoo leagues, 7-point favorites on the road against Tennessee. Again, we talked about the revenge game narrative. I think Mike Vrabel is going to come in and try to embarrass this Tennessee Titans defense or this Tennessee Titans team after they fired their head coach that they replaced Mike Vrabel with after firing him when he probably most definitely should have not been fired. Anyway, Cleveland, available in 62% of Yahoo leagues. They are 2.5-point home favorites against the Miami Dolphins. That line is very interesting. Very interesting line there. Anyway, they're favored. So do with that information what you will. Chicago defense, available in 94% of Yahoo leagues. The Chicago defense actually looks pretty solid, if I must say so myself. I know they've gotten a bad rap. They've given us some big performances. But I think it's Dennis Allen over there. They look like they play hard. Things are clicking. I think they give up, a few big plays, maybe too many big plays every now and then. But on the whole, I think their defense is pretty solid. So available 94% of Yahoo leagues, 4.5-point favorites at home against New Orleans. And last but not least, let's talk about Carolina defense and special teams. Available 99% of Yahoo leagues, 1.5-point favorites on the road against the New York Jets. It was crazy because when this line opened, the Jets were favored by 1.5, which I thought was crazy. And now it's corrected itself, and Carolina is favored by 1.5. And watch this be the week that everyone picks Carolina and then the Jets destroy their survivors. Anyway, that's probably not going to happen. But y'all, as always, it's always fun being on here with y'all. So that's going to do it for the Week 7 waiver show. Hopefully this helps you navigate those injuries, make the right moves heading into this next week here. So remember, this part of the season is where leagues are won. So stay active, stay locked in, stay sharp, keep making those smart roster decisions. Keep, coming here, listening to me, or whoever you find helpful. Now, if you did find this helpful, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/FFDX. Make sure you turn on those notifications if you are following me on X at the real Jon J_FF, so you don't miss any of the upcoming shows, including our matchup show on Friday. And if you don't forget, I didn't forget about you podcast listeners. If you're watching on Apple or watching on Spotify, because that's a thing, or you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, maybe you just found us, welcome. But make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe or that follow button so you don't miss an episode. Also, last but not least, don't forget, if you want the free, 100% free fantasy football diagnostics cheat sheet, you got to go to patreon.com/FFDX. The link is also in the show notes. The link is also in my bio, whether you're following me on X or you're following me on Instagram. And if you want that extra edge, right, join that FFDX supporter tier, where you'll get my expanded rankings, which includes my top 20 quarterbacks, top 20 tight ends, top 30 running backs and wide receivers, as opposed to the top 10 that's just in the cheat sheet. You'll get a weekly waiver wire article that drops on Monday night, right? So everything that I talked about in the podcast, you'll get all of that in a weekly waiver wire article to you on Monday. So you have an opportunity to digest it, and maybe you still want to come here and listen to my thoughts on it. But the cheat sheet is where you'll have how it's ranked, what the waiver priorities are, some stat nuggets that I may have dug up between by on Tuesday, and then you'll also get the Sunday afternoon. I keep calling it Sunday morning, but it's really a Sunday afternoon Q&A. I guess it's morning in on the West Coast. If you're a West Coast listener, it's morning for you, but it's 12 p.m. Eastern on Sundays. So again, 30 minutes. You guys can just hop in. You can ask me any question you want, whether that's start sit questions, trade questions, who would pick up on the waiver wire before week 6, who has the highest upside going into weeks, going into the next week. Some betting questions, life questions if you want, whatever you guys want. So, 30 minutes, Sunday afternoon, 12 p.m. Eastern. And again, that's if you join the FFDX supporter tier for just $1 a month. So go ahead, click that link and get the best value there is in the fantasy football industry. So appreciate everyone who tuned in live. Much love as always. Good luck on waivers this week. I'll catch y'all next time. And I'm out of here. Peace.